Hey, Stephen in here doing the junkyard crawl with a twist. This is the big Olds barn. Get it? It's an old barn, but it's full of Oldsmobiles. We're in Palmer, Massachusetts, and we'll take a break from Burnston Auto Wrecking for a couple of days to explore the cool Oldsmobile products in that barn. Everyone loves a barn find. Let's dig in. As we continue our dive into the big Olds barn, which is basically the estate of Warren D., a longtime Olds fanatic and collector, we see this wheel right here. Now, if you're as old as I am, you'll recognize this instantly as being from an Olds Toronado. In fact, this one's kind of neat. It still has the trim ring, which was an option on the Toronado, and this tire with these twin white lines right here. This is an original equipment Toronado tire. It's a BF Goodrich Silvertown, and we can see here, it is right here, Silvertown right there, belted. And the Olds Toronado, we have to remember, was a front wheel drive car. And BF Goodrich worked with Olds engineers to design a tire that was as good as pulling the car as it was as steering. So the Toronado original equipment tires are these things right here with the two white walls made by BF Goodrich. And here's one right here. Now, something interesting about the Olds Toronado is this wheel. Look at all that offset. It's crazy. Well, the reason for that is we all know the Olds Toronado was a front wheel drive car. As a result, the hub to hub width on Toronado was wider than any other Olds because of all that drivetrain they had to package between the fenders. That's why a hubcap from like an Olds 88 won't begin to work on a Toronado wheel. Instead, a very specific deep hubcap had to be designed for the Toronado, which covers and hides over that offset of the wheel. Kind of interesting. And again, if you didn't know, this is a Toronado brochure right here. Check out the wheel, and there's the tire with the white line and the trim ring, which was an option. But again, Toronado was all about front wheel drive, and it was a revolution. And here it is right here. Here's the cutaway of all that stuff. And again, GM had to pack all that stuff between the two wheels, so it's quite wide and mandated a weird offset, which we see right here. Now, the only downside to these rims, these cannot be used on like an Olds 98 or an 88, or certainly not even a Cutlass, because the bolt pattern is different on the A bodies. Beyond that, this thing tucks in so far, it'll hit the suspension and wheelhouse. So these are specific to front wheel drive Olds Tornados, but they also work on Cadillac Eldorados of 67 onward, which were also front wheel drive. Here's a Johan kit of the 70 Toronado, and this one again shows the optional deluxe wheel cover. And here's one right here in the flesh, or in the tin, I should say. Love the T for Toronado right there. Pretty cool. Let's keep digging around here and see what else we can discover. And I just love going through barns like this. You just don't know what you're going to find. And speaking of Toronados, look at this. This is a brake drum right here off the back of the Toronado. We can see it's cast iron. All those fins on that. These came along on the front and back of Toronados in 1966. And again, there we have it right there, 6 Olds Toronado right there. Somebody penned that on there in a paint pen. And I got to say, 1969-70 Chrysler front drums on full-size Newports looked a lot like this. I got to say, they probably took a look at this. And the whole point of these fins is that they increase surface area and behave like heat sinks. And on a car that weighed 4,700 pounds or more, you wanted to dissipate as much heat as you could. Thus, the Toronado's finned drums. Nice stash again here of all kinds of hubcaps. Not an Olds piece, but man, look at this, the old Chevy poverty cap right here. You could find this on a 348 Impala or a 62 409 car, or a 6-cylinder, Aunt Minnie's 6-cylinder could be there too. Going along, oh, a Corvair engine, very cool right here. This one is the Monza engine with 1, 2, 3, 4 carburetors. This is a special one, not as cool as a turbo, but still pretty nifty. Here's that air-cooled fan housing thing right here. And the Corvair's fan belt runs in a weird circuitous route from here to there with these pulleys. It does a twist, and believe it or not, Gates, I think, was the contractor that came up with that belt that can do the twist-o-matic and do it just fine. Now, the Corvair, of course, is an aluminum engine. That's why the cylinder heads are so light. And here is the combustion chambers on a Corvair. And again, talking about heat sinks and fins, we got them here. Again, dissipate the heat with all that surface area right there. There's no radiator or coolant on a Corvair. But again, kind of similar to a small block Chevy in terms of the valve orientation, I guess. But again, strictly 6-cylinder, flat 6, cast iron exhaust manifold clamped to the aluminum of the cylinder head. Kind of a cool thing. So it's not an Oldsmobile piece, but it is in the GM family. And Mr. D was an equal opportunity collector. Again, his primary things were Oldsmobiles and Ford trucks. So let's continue down here and see what else we can find. I gotta say, I have a soft spot for old bias ply wide tires on the front or the back. These are some old McCreary Roadstar 60s. Kind of cool. G60 15 right there. Looks like a Ford pickup truck 5-on-5 pattern. But again, I love the way these things just have a nice flat footprint. You lay rubber with these things, nice long strip. Meanwhile, radials kind of have a weird transition from vertical to horizontal. It's kind of round, but I love old bias ply wide tires, especially on the back. Let's dig around in here. A lot of Oldsmobile, second generation Olds engines. These are like the 370 through 394 era. Here's our 4-barrel intake manifold, I think from, this looks to be probably a 394 4-barrel, 1963, 64. By 65, of course, the 425 replaced the 394 as the big dog in Oldsmobile land. Lots of cast iron right here. Big time heaviness. A lot of cool stuff. Oh, like a Buick Dynaflow, perhaps, right here. The aluminum automatic, this thing right here. I don't claim to know my GM automatics. There was a bunch of different variations. This is an aluminum case. Some people call these Slim Jims. I don't know what I don't know about these things. It's not a Turbo 400. We'll come around to the front of this thing. We'll see a very unusual structure. There's a front pump and this radial fins type construction right there. These are interesting transmissions. Again, it's not a Turbo 400. Lots of revolution and evolution in the world of GM automatic transmissions. Now this is kind of cool right here. It's upside down. I'm not going to try and move it. This is the dashboard from an Olds 98. You can see it here right upside down. This is probably from 62-ish. Again, this is heavy, die-cast aluminum, or possibly some kind of a pot metal. But again, the ovoid shapes here, 62-ish, I'm gonna bet on this thing. It has the Oldsmobile radio. And again, the weight of this thing, that's about 60 pounds right there. So again, this is from the days before anybody cared about CAFE, corporate average fuel economy. That come along in 75, 76. And cars were big because nobody cared if they were too heavy and drank too much fuel because gas was 30 cents a gallon. Who cared anyway? More old Olds and other iron is this stuff right here. A bunch of old cylinder heads. Again, today aluminum cylinder heads are everywhere for small block Chevys, Mopars, you name it. But back in the day, cast iron was the rule. And this right here is an interesting thing. This is a first generation Olds V8, the Rocket. And we can see that it's similar to the Pontiac, which also came out around the same time. Again, 1949 for Olds, 55 for Pontiac. But we can see that something unique to these things is how GM had a thing where they Siamesed the exhaust port. Here's the two outboard exhausts, but the two middles came out through the same opening. Now there's a divider in there, but this is the Oldsmobile, mid-50s. Here's Pontiac, mid-50s, same deal. But look how the small Pontiac exhaust ports, well, they're small. Look at that compared to the Oldsmobile. Olds is bigger, you know, it's interesting. On the intake side, we notice that the Oldsmobile and Pontiac are similar, but not the same once again. And even though they came from the same GM, again, Olds has these sort of rectangular Siamese intake ports. Pontiac has almost an oval, if you will, rounded, if you will. And again, something unique too is how Oldsmobile used a rocker shaft and rocker arms to actuate the valves, whereas Pontiac used studs and rockers, which are the same thing used by Chevrolet. This is a Chevy small block head right here, and we can see the same studs and rocker arms in use on the Chevy and the Pontiac, which was kind of unique. I think Buick and Cadillac and Olds all had a shaft. Chevrolet weight rocker arm, and here it is right here. Here's those lightweight rockers right here. And these were used all the way up to the 455 and, you know, the heavy duty 421s and stuff like that. And this again is a Pontiac cylinder head right here. Similar to an Olds, but not the same. And finally, combustion chambers. Pontiac, little closed chamber, like a bathtub type deal right there. Kind of a wedge, but again, the bathtub is what they like to call that one. Oldsmobile, well, they had a similar deal, but more of a flat wedge kind of a thing right there. And again, here's the, this must be the intake valve right here. And I always say, if you look at the space between the valves, that'll tell you if it's a big or a small valve version. And again, this one here being probably a 370 or something like that from the 1950s, it's going to be a humble beginning, not quite the 394 monster that eventually would evolve out of this. And speaking of monsters, cast iron was used in GM automatic transmissions. This is the main case for some GM automatic, some sort of a hydromatic. Look at the iron. Here's the valve body kind of baked into the damn thing. Look at that right there. You know, later transmissions, of course, aluminum replace iron, but from 50 to, I don't know, 61-ish, cast iron was the rule. And finally, speaking of cast iron, the first generation Olds 303 Rocket, for the first few years, came with this bizarre, integrally cast bell housing. And early Chrysler Hemis, 51234, also had the same effect right here. Now, the only bummer to this, well, aside from the weight that it adds to the engine block structure, is that if you want to run any kind of a hot rod transmission, you need an adapter. And with this here, the stack height of your drivetrain gets pretty long. So you're kind of stuck with either the factory 3-speed manual, yeah, they had them, or an Oldsmobile automatic behind any of these Olds blocks, the 303s. And thereabouts, that still had this cast-in structure. That would go away. I believe it might be, well, this is a Ford Y block. But again, that would go away after a few years. But again, iron and Detroit engines went hand in hand for many, many years. Of course, OPEC, the early 70s, changed everything when lightweight construction became the rule. Now, if you like this video, this is the third of probably 6 or 7 videos from here at Warren D's, the late Warren D. And if you see anything in this video that you need to buy, well, check out the website that we have listed, the email address, I should say, and contact the son, Michael D, if you want to buy something. It's all for sale. And of course, be back tomorrow for the next video, which will hit in the morning.